my ARP focused on targeted recruitment for children of color in the child welfare system. And I worked directly in the field of adoption for 8 years before coming over to the state of Michigan to become a trainer, because in Michigan, adoption is privatized. So it's sort of taboo to come work for the state, but I did it so I could come be a trainer. And during my time in the field, there was no conversation around disproportionality, disparities. I didn't really participate in any type of cultural competence conversations. And I'm biracial, a person of color, and I have some of my own battles that I fight with my identity. And I wanted to make sure that our workers are going to be equipped enough to have this conversation and be ready to have the conversation when it comes to cross-racial placements and cross-racial topics and placing African-American children in homes. So I didn't have these conversations until I came to the state. And on the very first day of work, my supervisor and my mentor through this whole process, Andrew, provided that safe space and said, let's talk about race. And I was like, oh, that's loud in the workplace. Okay, so let's do it. So when I was doing my research for this project, I was looking at our database that houses all the children that do not have an identified family for adoption. And I noticed that over 50% of the kids that are listed on our Michigan database were children of color. Upon further investigation, I had found that 17% of our general population in Michigan are children of color, yet 31% of the kids in care were children of color. So I knew from the beginning of this whole fellowship and the whole journey that I wanted to create a training, because I'm a trainer. And I was like, okay, let's do a training. Let's get the word out there and let's get the message to the field. So I thought if adoption workers and recruiters and licensing workers could receive training and information on evidence-based targeted recruitment practices that focused on increasing resource families for children of color, including those that are going to adopt or foster transracially, and they're able to utilize these practices in their planning and recruitment efforts, will it result in a change in recruitment plans and their efforts? And will it lead to an increase in the number of homes? Now, when I began my research, I was going to target it and focus just on African-American children, but I changed it to all children of color because I wanted to make sure that no one was left out. Although in a lot of my research and what I'm going to focus on today, the huge disproportionality was in Black children. So I began with the collection of the data, and here was my approach. So I analyzed current recruitment plans for 4 counties in Michigan, and I'll talk a little bit later on how I analyzed some more additional counties as a result of doing this work. I analyzed data collected from the State of Michigan Data Warehouse, which is our database that collects all of our data that's child welfare related. I disseminated targeted recruitment survey to recruiters in 4 counties. I facilitated several focus groups. I reviewed literature and gathered some best practices around targeted and diligent recruitment. I created and conducted several trainings around targeted recruitment, building recruitment plans, and conducting cultural self-assessments, cultural competence self-assessments, and I collected and analyzed feedback from those trainings. So before going into the data portion, I do feel it's important to understand Michigan's current recruitment practices. And recruitment is broken down by a state and then county, state and then region and then county practices. So at the state level, there's a yearly conference that gets everyone like level set, and it focuses on general recruitment, and it talks about what I'll refer to throughout this training, our AFPRR plans, which are adoption and foster parent recruitment and retention plans that the regions come together and build to really focus on recruitment. And then new this year, I did get to present at that state training and talk about some of my ARP data, and I'll talk about that in a bit. And then at a region level, we have 5 regions in the state of Michigan, and at those regions, there's some quarterly recruitment practices that go on. That includes trainings and meetings and reviewing data on our statewide data dashboard. And then there's recruitment planning that happens by region as well. And then there's countywide recruitment planning. So recruitment planning meetings in all 83 counties in the state of Michigan on a monthly basis to talk about what type of recruitment they're going to do that month. And that's where like some things such as coalition meetings come into play. So a core part of my ARP was analyzing these recruitment practices at a county level. So I analyzed 4 AFPRR plans for 4 different counties. So our 1 AFPRR plan for 4 different counties. I analyzed the year 20 to 21. So this past year, I wanted to know what people were doing in the field for their recruitment. So I looked at the number of county recruitment planning, the number of agencies that were in the recruitment planning meetings. I wanted to look at how many goal homes they wanted to be licensed, how many activities they were doing, and what did their activities focus on. So for a majority of this presentation, we're going to really be looking and talking about Washtenaw County because we'll see in a second, they were the biggest county of disproportionality. But so for an example, for Washtenaw County, 8 agencies came around the table to have their meeting for their AFPRR plan. They had 45 activities that they came up with that they wanted to do for the year 2020 to 2021. And only 7 of those activities focus on the disparity population. Now, when I talk about disparity population, I'm talking about people of color, the Native population, the LGBTQIA+ community, medically fragile children and teens. And a majority of these activities that were happening on this little lower level here in Wayne, Macomb, Oakland, and Washtenaw were all focused on LGBTQIA+ population, which is great, but there was no focus on children of color. So after getting this prelim data, I was able to take this and present at that statewide annual recruitment and retention planning meeting on May 18th. And just preface that I had this training coming and show them the numbers and say, hey, this is what your county's doing right now. And I'm putting together this training so we can get workers in to really focus on doing targeted recruitment for children of color. So next on my journey, I analyzed the state of Michigan data warehouse. So I looked at general population of children by race, and I broke that down by county. I looked at children in foster care by race. I looked at foster families by race and county. And I looked at the placement preferences of children by race, county, and gender as well. I wanted to see if there was a disproportionality in these counties, which indeed there was in every county, a disproportionality of children of color. So the next 2 slides I'm going to look at or bring up here are going to show that disproportionality. So on this slide, we can see the general population of county by county of race. So I'm going to focus, like I said, on Washtenaw County for this presentation, but when I present my training, I talk about everyone and we break down each county one by one. But so for Washtenaw County, the general population level of Black or African-American youth was 18% compared to 72% of white youth. But when it came to the children in care, 50% of the kids in Washtenaw County were Black. So 18% of our general pop, but 50% of the kids in care in Washtenaw County were Black. So I put that alongside my data from my recruitment plans, and yeah, they had 7 activities on their chart that they wanted to talk about for the disparity population, but they had 0 that focused on children of color, and they were the county with the biggest disproportionality. So I wanted to meet with them and say, well, why are we not looking at that? Why are we not looking at the numbers? Or do you not know the data? Did you not know that the disproportionality was so big? Also, looking at these numbers and looking at the disproportionality, it led me to ask questions and think about, what about the placement preferences? So I started to think about questions around placement preferences. And we know that we have MIPA and IEP in place, and we cannot replace the narrative of MIPA and IEP. There's federal laws in place that govern how we have to make our placement decisions when it comes to race and color. And we have to make sure that, excuse me, they're not our main basis for placing our children into a home. But that doesn't mean that we can't look at it. That doesn't mean that we can't focus on it. When we're having conversations with our foster parents from the very beginning, starting at orientation, when we give them our applications to become a foster parent, when we give them their applications to adopt, when we complete their home studies, we're asking them, what type of race of child are you willing to take into your home? And what I came across thinking about that and thinking about, we ask our foster parents these questions, but do we track it? Is there a way to find some of this information so we can really hone in on what the placement preferences are currently looking like? So I found through this process, and this part was not easy for me, that at the state level, we track what race the foster parent is. Although we ask these questions on the home study, the application, and orientation, we don't track the information. So at the state level, we track what race the foster parent is, but we don't track what their placement preferences. I found at the region level that we track what the placement preference is, but we don't track what race the foster parent is. So it's sort of like a blind placement per se. So I analyzed, I was able to collect the data from the state level, looking at the race of the foster parents, and look at the data from the region level, which looks at the race that they're willing to take into their home. And Sherilyn and her team worked magic and was able to help me get the placement preferences and the outcomes of that, so we could really look at the numbers. So I analyzed the data of the race of the foster parents. I looked at if there was any exclusions from any homes. We looked at some sample exclusions, and we looked at the racial preferences, placement preferences. So this graph just shows a little bit of the foster home licenses by county and race of the licensee. So again, focusing on Washtenaw, the county with the highest disproportionality, 12% of their foster homes, or 12.6% of their foster homes were African-American, while 83% of their foster homes were white. So I feel like when I was offering my training to individuals, it was important to look at this data and see, so we can get in the mindset of having culturally appropriate conversations with our foster parents in a challenging but not a canceling way. I didn't want to push at our foster parents and open up the can of worms so much that we push them away and they don't want to go through the process anymore. This shows a little bit of a sample of some racial preferences when it came to exclusions. Now, I don't have a data sample from Washtenaw, but when I did look at some from Macomb and Oakland and Wayne, we can see that some foster homes did have explicit exclusions on why they would take that they would take any race but African American. Now, it was nice to see one here that they would take any race but Caucasian, but any race but African American. And I kept asking, and I kept in my trainings, I asked the question as to why are our foster parents not open to taking African American children into their home? So we were starting to have more of those conversations. This is a graph of foster home licenses placement preferences by county and race of children. So this graph and the next graph does show specific placement preferences. And we can see overwhelmingly that although Washtenaw County did have that 83% of white homes, 66% of the homes in Washtenaw County said that they were willing to take biracial or cross-racial placements, but 0% said that they'd take African American. Why? Again, some more data around that. I have, 92.3% that they would take biracial or cross-racial, and such a low percentage that they would take African-American. So I started thinking around questions and asking really hard ones and being really frank and really blunt, in my trainings with my workers. And I said, why aren't foster parents open to taking full African-American children, but they're open to taking cross-racial or biracial children? Is it straight up because their skin is lighter and they think that it's going to be easier for them to transition into their home? Which I was thinking about that. Or majority of it is probably because we're not giving them the right resources to feel comfortable. So how can we give our parents the resources to feel comfortable and confident when it comes to having culturally competent conversations, having cross-racial placements in their home, things of that sort? So I was hoping that showing this data in my training would really start to get the workers' gears going about, okay, let's start to be more confident in having the conversations with our foster parents. So after I analyzed the placement preference data, I disseminated a survey about targeted recruitment to 70 staff members that included recruiters, adoption workers, adoption supervisors, and licensing staff. I wanted to capture what was happening in the field right now around the work that they were doing, and right now around the recruitment that they were doing and the conversations that they were having. So I was able to get a 43% response rate. And I asked what their county of recruitment was. And I asked at what rate of success in recruiting for children of color, what rates of success are you having? Are you having a great success, quite a bit success, somewhat, not too much, not at all? What kind of success are you having when it comes to recruiting for children of color? So there was some that said they had to a great extent or quite a bit or somewhat. More of it was leaning towards somewhat. And these are just some of the responses that really stuck out to me. Like they've done recruiting in their years in licensing, but they haven't done anything that targets recruitment in this population. Here's one that goes with, if they didn't do any recruitment at all, they were focusing all of their recruitment around just general recruitment, nothing to do with children of color. We need foster homes now. I'm not worried about who I'm recruiting for. I'm just worried about recruiting in general. And saying that they were addressing the needs for families of all our children in the same way, which is sort of a hindrance, I think, because we're not looking at the needs of specific children. I also asked questions that were very blunt and straightforward as, do you resemble the children that you're recruiting for? And a large majority of those were no. Do you have ideas in targeted recruitment for African-American communities? And are you including targeted recruitment in your practices right now? So outside of doing things like Black History Month activities or MLK Day, there was not a lot of recruitment happening for those specific populations. After my survey, I held 2 focus groups. I held a focus group with regional recruiters, which I'm very thankful that I got to hold a focus group with Washtenaw County, which was my biggest county of disproportionality. And I had conversations around the questions that I asked in the survey. What's working? I showed them the data. They hadn't seen it before. They didn't know that they were the biggest county with the largest disproportionality. But they were very open and said that after I provided the information to them, that they were going to require all their staff to attend my pilot training when I was able to launch. I then held a focus group with the regional placement unit, and the regional placement unit is responsible. It's in Wayne County, which is one of our most populated counties, Detroit area, and it's responsible for placing children around the state who, if there's not a home available, like within a person's agency or at a particular DHS, they'll send like the word out and ask everyone. Now, they're the ones that told me that they were tracking what race foster homes were willing to accept, but not race the foster parents were. So I was able to get a lot of information from these 2 focus groups and be able to go forward with putting that into my training. So after the focus group, I focused on my literature review, and that's where I came up with, from the literature review, some tips for targeted recruitment. So I combined all of the data I collected from the focus groups and the survey and the data I analyzed and the tips for targeted recruitment. And I created a half-day training, a 3-hour training, in which I create a safe space to have culturally aware conversations. And I include a data presentation where we talk about all of the numbers in detail. We talk about tips for targeted recruitment. And we have race equity charged conversations, which have been interesting thus far. So these are the tips that I include in my training, and I focused on 6 main recruitment tips. We talk about including members of diverse community in the recruitment efforts. Does your office have a diverse staff? If they don't, can we bring in people from the community or mentors of color to come on and help us in getting our word out about the need for foster parents, especially the need for foster parents for children of color? If their agency is predominantly white or new to recruiting diverse families, this is a time that we took to assess and reassess the agency's cultural competence. And what we did during the training to be able to do this was do a cultural competence self-assessment, a cultural diversity self-assessment. 34 questions, and I want to know, we're going to look hard at our implicit biases and see where we are on this scale and what we need to work on. I created a safe space to have the conversation, so everyone was felt comfortable in sharing what they needed to share when it comes to the cultural competence conversations, because we're all in different parts of our journey, and some people have never talked about it before, and some people can't stop talking about it, like me. So, and then we talked about reassessments. So taking time to build trusting relationship with communities of color, thinking outside the box when it comes to the activities. Yeah, we have Black History Month, but what about Juneteenth and AAPI month when it comes to our Asian American youth and pride events? Emphasizing on tailoring community education efforts for particular audiences. So looking at your own agency data and really focusing on what your targeted recruitment is going to look like for your agency. What do you need? Some counties, yeah, it was our Black or African American children where there was a disproportionality, but some counties it was mixed. So what are we going to do separate for those agencies that are not necessarily just around Black or African American? So enlist support from diverse churches, because our communities of color, a lot of them do have a big connection with the church and they're very faith-based. So how can we get in there? And then reaching out to types of people whom your agency has successfully recruited for before. So let's leave no rock unturned. Let's see who we can talk to, what's worked in the past, and who we can team up with to really move forward in our recruitment. So on June 16th, I launched my pilot training after gathering all of the information. I built a training from the ground up and launched it. And the first training was held for recruiters, licensing, foster care adoption, our program office, and our Michigan's Children Institute. And that had 50 participants. So the training is going to be offered statewide quarterly. Hopefully I can train another person, so I'm not the only one training. But last week I was able to hold 2 more sessions, and now over 170 people across the state are trained, and I have more coming. So I'm offering it to agencies. It's going to be virtual for now, but agencies, I've had some talks with some other states possibly about offering it as well, but it's definitely going well. So I did send out an evaluation after my pilot. I wanted to know if individuals were getting out of my pilot or getting out of the training what they needed to get out of it. So were they able to define disproportionality and disparity? Strongly agree that they were. Were they able to recognize disproportionality and disparities in the child welfare system? Yeah, they were able to do that as well. I wanted to know if they were able to focus on ways to conduct targeted recruitment for children of color. Definitely agreed that they came out of it with more ideas. I know some things have started to develop because of the training that I have held. And do they feel that the cultural competence self-assessment was helpful and something that they'd use again? And they all said yes, or there was one neither agree or disagree, but large majority yes, that they were going to use that self-assessment again. And do they feel, the most important, do they feel that they're going to be intentional when building their recruitment plans? And all of them said, yeah, we're going to think about our population that we're recruiting for. So these are just a couple of the responses. Excellent training. They appreciated having the training and starting the conversation. Some individuals said that they hadn't had that conversation before, so they felt that a space was needed to be able to. Thankful for the discussion and exactly the kinds of conversations that we need to be having in all areas of the system. So after my pilot training, maybe one of the highlights of doing my ARP project, I was invited to speak for Capacity Building Center for States for their diligent recruitment peer group and talk about what I've been working on the last year and how important it is to use data-driven outcomes when talking about our diligent recruitment strategies. So that was definitely a highlight of my journey, and I loved being invited to be able to do that. But my journey did come with a couple of struggles. Collection of data when it came to the placement preferences. I think that I got my final data the day before I launched my pilot training. And that was a little stressful because I was like, okay, we got it and it's important, but we made sure that it happened the day before. There was some discrepancies at, like I said, the state level versus the region level, who collects, who doesn't collect, and getting my hands on some of that was quite interesting. And then questions that arose about just differences in case jurisdiction and placements and how we really look at that across the county. So how am I going to continue my ARP? Training quarterly and requesting, keeping it's going in our statewide repertoire. So it's part of our statewide training that anyone can request in the state of Michigan, which is super awesome. I plan on next year analyzing the plans for the same counties to see if it improved, which I hope it does. And then hopefully, maybe, I don't know, possibly analyzing more counties as requested. I did get questions why I didn't do them all, but 83 counties would have took me, a lot longer than this year that we had. And then continuing the conversations because it's so important. So what's next on my journey was the hardest question for me, but just reflection around this. I did some pretty awesome things during it, my training and being able to work with some awesome people. I completed a DEI in the workplace certificate program at the same time I did this. So I really think that the skills I learned in that really helped my project. And then just continuing to create safe spaces to have and lead the conversation at a local level here in Michigan and hopefully one day nationally. The impact of MPLD has been, as for other fellows, I know, amazing. I grew professionally in my skills of coaching, which that was something I wanted to focus on, and confidence. Like, I'm not scared to come to the table and share what I have to say. And I'm probably the one who shares too much now. Doing things I thought I couldn't do. Data, because I said, I'm not a data person, but Sherilyn changed my mind. I love data now. And writing policy, I was so scared to write policy. And then I was like, man, this is awesome. So I really learned about writing policy through this as well. Personally, just growing in my journey of race equity work growing in my race equity lens, and really my confidence, again, in bringing my ideas to the table. And I just want to thank Arlene and Sherilyn for that, and my mentor, Andrew, who can't be here with us today, but they have been so awesome through this project with all the questions I had, and every time I had to meet with someone or I couldn't get anything, and just keeping me motivated. So these are my references that I used today. And then just some additional training information that's out there around race equity work, if you want to reach out to us here in Michigan.